and that means we're going to have officials. We have to have officials. Those are the guys that keep the thing running straight. And a good friend, a guy that I've known for a long time and have a lot of respect for, is the coordinator of football officials in the Big 12 Conference, Greg Burks. Greg, welcome to the show, and how you doing?
I am doing good, Robert. How have you been?
I've been good. I've been good. I've stayed diligent, wearing my mask and social distancing. I keep telling my wife, "Stay 6 feet away. Come on, you're violating my space." No, I'm teasing. Uh, but but no, it's been an interesting, obviously an interesting summer. And I read a story in the Athletic this weekend about. I now know not to ask any permission about being at a coin toss. It's going to be a small affair if we're fortunate enough to have them, and that's one of the really superficial changes. You've had to rethink how your guys do their jobs with this pandemic. I imagine it's been a big project for you.
You know, every year we have turnover, and in the Big 12 staff, we had a significant turnover. We had 30 officials, on-field officials hired by the NFL, and then Mike DeFee, who was and has been one of our top referees for a long time, took a training position with them as well for 10 years. Is now the coordinator of officials for the NFL. He's come off the field in the NFL. And so we've seen a big transition this year either way, and then when you add the virus on hires, but as you alluded to, because of the virus and the many state laws that are in place now with quarantines and whatnot, we're looking at trying to figure out how to get officials to a game so that they can draw positive when they were there. They need to stay there to quarantine. If you drive to the game, you can get back in your car and serve the quarantine at home. So that's been a caveat that's been pretty interesting to be dealing. You know, I appear in the next week or two, and that will give me some idea of how I'm going to start tackling that. But a few years ago, probably 15 years ago, we changed from only hiring officials that lived in the conference footprint, went to a flat rate for officials' pay, and that meant we could hire anybody from anywhere. And our officiating staff really is from all over the country, to include Hawaii. And so it's going to be a bit more of a challenge than it would have been 20 years ago, where you had to learn to go ahead and work games. So that was a long end, and had some things this year that I faced before.
Yeah, and I read in this article you and the supervisors or coordinators from the other leagues are communicating with who lives in various footprints in order to try and minimize travel. We may see officials, in other parts of the country, um, working games in the Big 12, or officials that work in other leagues that live in our footprint working Big 12 games, and vice versa. Some of the guys you have that live outside our footprint may be working in other conferences.
That's a possibility. Where it comes into play the most, the biggest portion of our staff probably lives in Texas, Kansas. So for Oklahoma State games, I don't anticipate you'll see too many new faces. The the danger here is that if you use people geographically, you may see the same faces more than you've ever done. You know, kind of a rule of thumb is I try and not have a get officiated 2-3 times a year. It just leads to issues that, you know, it's pretty hard to referee a school more than 3 times and not have issues come up. And so we try and make sure that we rotate the crews so that I don't see anybody too much. This year that may change, And I think in that article that you're referring to, I noted the Suffolk area of West Virginia that can go there. So we're going to have to look at maybe looking at some Big Ten ACC officials in that area that might be able to work games there. And I don't know if this will work for the whole season. I don't know if we'll try it for the first month and see where we're at, but um, I'm pretty sure that we're going to end up, especially in West Virginia, using some people that may.
You know, one of the things I was going to ask you about as well is normally you have your physical testing in the summer, you have your clinic. I know I've been at that clinic on a number of occasions. I think that was had to be held more virtually this year, but you know, just as far as keeping in touch with your officials and making sure they're doing the things they need to do to be sharp and be ready. How has that gone?
We had our clinic this past weekend for an hour and 15, and there. The one thing that has occurred as a positive is everybody has been doing Zoom and Microsoft. We are able to meet the studies for officials has been enhanced because of this. We've learned to review plays. The national replay coordinator has been doing a weekly comp would be really effective rather than meeting a large, meeting room at a hotel and project the play up on the screen. We're able to do these things, and so that part of this has been very good. What we lost spring football, while we're able to work on rules and watch film through Zoom, that's not the same thing as being on the film, and that's really important to get that experience to be able to be in a position. And so I am worried we're not getting enough live work, but I know that our officials have been working really, really hard on the rules and the tests and that kind of stuff. So I feel pretty confident that we'll be in good shape in that. If we can't get a protocol in place, the last thing we'd want to do is send an official that would create a problem for the teams prior to the season starting. So we have to get that taken care of so we can get some officials on the practice field because they need to work is the same way that the players and coaches.
Greg Burks, coordinator of officials for the Big 12 Conference. He was a long-time official in college sports and referee and did an outstanding job. In fact, national championship game, and then became coordinator for the Mountain West Conference and did an outstanding job with the Mountain West, and before moving on to head up the Big 12. And of course, the Big 12 and the Mountain West work together. You see a lot of officials that come up through the Mountain West, and even will work some games on in both conferences' schedule. You mentioned the turnover. We had a couple of officials. We had Bill DeFee on, or not Bill DeFee, Mike DeFee, excuse me, and we had Cooper Castleberry on during the pandemic back in the spring, and talking about their retirement. Two guys that we've known forever and ever. Um, and then, like you mentioned, you also have the NFL hiring some of your officials, and if I'm not mistaken, another referee, I think Reggie Smith, you know, switch conferences. But how did you feel about your recruitment and the guys you've brought up that are now going to be working Big 12 conference games?
Yeah, I'm excited uh, for them for the experience working in the Big 12. College football is amazing. I mean, it's an incredible experience, and for most of these officials, they have worked at each level and have earned the right to work in the Big 12. And I know they've made every one of those steps. You know, for us, Most of these guys work in Division II football, and then from Division II, they'll make the transition to the Southland. The pyramid gets steeper, the numbers get tougher. It just becomes you weed out, and just like works the same way as players. And these guys go through the Southland, and then they come to the Mountain West, and then from the Mountain West to the Big 12. So they've been tested. They're quality officials, and I know that the people that have been promoted and are going to be in the Big 12 are going to do a great job. And it's just a matter of getting used to just one more step up in scrutiny. You know, the game's just a little bit faster at the Big 12 level, and it's just obviously a little more scrutiny than anywhere they've worked, and they'll be on national television every game and all of those kind of things. And it takes a little bit to get there, but I have no doubt that they are qualified and ready to go. In the world of officiating, we have a lot more people wanting to do it than we have slots available, and so it's a luxury in some regards, because the people we're hiring now have been through camps and clinics, and Zoom meetings that we've talked about have made film so readily available, and officials are testing and becoming more qualified much quicker than when I came through the system. I remember watching VHS tapes that you really couldn't tell what happened. In today's world, our film is so good, the evaluation is so quick. You know, by the time you've showered after the game, your film's up, and it's going to be evaluated, and you know if you were right or wrong, and the scrutiny is so much higher. And so I'm really confident that the people that are going to take the places, and there'll be some new faces, and quite honestly, coaches don't like new faces. They like Mike Defee and Cooper Castleberry being there, because they've built a level of confidence and comfort with those guys, and so there'll be a little bit of a change there. But I know that the people that we hired to fill those slots are ready to go and are going to turn out to be just really great additions to the Big 12.
Yeah, Greg, we mentioned early on, you mentioned protocols, and officials are going to be wearing masks. They have to be black. I kind of joked about the coin toss. The NCAA now mandates it's the referee and one player from each side, and that's it. Nobody else, and no other officials, no media at the coin toss. The bench areas have been lengthened. I think to the 15 is what it's going to be. I wanted to ask you specifically, because you worked a number of games at Boone Pickens Stadium. Um, I mean, there's some other sidelines in the Big 12 that are tight, but I don't think there's anything as tight as Boone Pickens. And I know they're trying to have that 6 foot or 6 yard neutral zone between the edge of the field and where coaches and players will be, and so forth. We've seen in Major League Baseball, you got to be careful about the old arguments, and in baseball they said no fighting. Well, they had to fight the first weekend, when somebody threw a pitch at another player. That's what happens. But how difficult is it going to be to deal with Boone Pickens Stadium? Because they're just, I mean, I've talked to the facilities people. They're thinking they may have to keep the first 10, 15 rows vacant, and some players may have to sit up in the stands, just to kind of keep that buffer zone between the field and players and coaches on the bench area.
Well, I think you're right. The sidelines at Boone Pickens is probably the tightest we have in the conference, but I really don't remember that being an issue, other than being knocked into the band when I was a side judge one time. I remember a game at the end of the half, a running back hit me and knocked me. I think I took out 3 trumpets and I don't know how many trombones, but that's just there are so many situations that we're facing this year that my approach is I hope we get to face them. In the scope of college football, figuring out how to make the sidelines work for us to play football, I hope we get to do that. And that I know that will be the key word for us this year as officials is flexible. We are going to face different scenarios in almost every game that we go to, and that's going to be one that we'll just work our way through. The idea of expanding the team box so that players can socially distance a little bit and there's more space, I know we're going to suggest to the coaches that they stay in the coaches box and stay out of the restricted area. But I know what happens when we kick the football off and we start playing football. We're going to find ourselves going back to what we've been doing our whole careers, and we'll just have to communicate a little bit more. That might be a little more difficult with everybody wearing masks. I jokingly said this weekend, if you go to the grocery store or restaurant and you're masked up now, you just don't tend to talk to people. But we'll have to find a way for officials to communicate with coaches to the degree that we need to make this work. And I hope that happens. I hope we get games going, and that I did see the baseball fight that you're alluding to, and that was the most polite baseball fight. You got to figure with all the things that would go on with that they were able to hold the distance pretty much and just woof at each other. I think when we have a football game going and we actually start hitting, the idea of social distancing will go out the window pretty fast, and we're just going to have to work with the coaches to remind them to try and give us some space. It's going to be hard for officials to wear a mask and run and all of those things, and we're just going to have to work through all those things and be flexible and make adjustments as we go.
Yeah, also too, and this just goes back to my history of being around and being friendly and appreciating the officials and what they do. I know so many of them talk about the meetings on Friday nights when they get to the town and they're getting ready for their assignment, and they'll look back on the video of the game they watched the week before. There's usually a dinner where they go out together, and that's when they catch up on each other's lives and families. And I read in that story in the Athletic that those may be suspended. They may do those from a Zoom conference from their individual hotel rooms, and I feel sorry for the officials because I do think a part of that for them is the bonding of their team. They're a team just like the two teams they're officiating on Saturdays, and taking away from that team camaraderie. I hate that for the officials.
Yeah, that's going to be another category under flexible. We're talking about doing all of our pregame stuff in Zoom meetings, maybe even with TV and clock operators and all of that on a Thursday night, so that officials will drive to games on Friday. They'll room by themselves. They'll probably drive to the stadium individually. And all of that's being done so that if one of them were to test positive, we would try and narrow the chances of them infecting another official or anybody else in the game. So these are things that are coming from medical staffs to say, here's the protocol that you need to use to try and make this happen, and we're going to do everything we can from the officiating side to make sure that we're a positive and not a negative. So there's no doubt. I mean, we'll spend more time probably on that Zoom call on Thursday night catching up, because you're exactly right. That football crew is together for the entire year, or has been until this year, so that they can work as a unit, that they're comfortable with any little idiosyncrasies that they may have on their crew, or how their referee likes things, or how they handle situations. And so that communication is going to have to happen virtually, if you will, and then we'll get on the field and work through that again. So my football family, that crew that you met with really was your family, because you're going to spend 10, 15 weeks a year, Friday, Saturday, and part of Sunday together, and that's what made us effective. So we're going to have to work really hard at still sharing that communication and working as a unit, but doing it in a much different manner than we've ever done prior to this season.
Yeah, I know. I keep thinking of things. I talked to Justin Williams, Oklahoma State's equipment guy, about this. Just the disinfecting of the football during the games.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just crazy to think about what you're going to have to do.
Yeah, officials are going to be masked up, and we're going to ask that they have the mask on at the start of every play, and then social distance at some point before they take the mask down if they need to breathe. We're moving to electronic whistles this year, so that we're not blowing anything through the whistle and through the air. Those are all significant differences from the way we've done everything else in the past, but we'll get through it. We'll find a way to get used to that and see what works the best, what protocols work the best. But I am sure getting used to that whistle holding it in your hand and pushing a button, we may have a whistle when we didn't want to have a whistle, or our whistles may be a little bit slower. Or so those are all things that we're going to work through this year. It may add a little bit of unusual situations for everybody, but I think we're all in the same camp. If we have to do these things to make college football go this year, as much as we all love college football, it's well worth the price of doing that.
Hey, Greg, I appreciate it. Good luck with your job, and like you said, hopefully you'll have a great season with you and your officials in the conference. And again, thanks for the time.
Anytime, Robert. It's always great to talk to you. Hope to get to see you soon.
All right, Greg Burks, coordinator of officiating